There's been a lot of questions circling the New York Rangers this offseason, including a possible Igor Shesterkin contract extension, as well as where does the newly acquired Rielly Smith fit into the lineup? Well, it looks like we may finally have some answers, and we're going to break all of that down in this episode of Rangers Digest. But a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 70% of you watching our videos are not actually subscribed to the channel, so if you want to do yourself a favor, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything New York Rangers. And of course, it's the dog days of summer, but Chris Drury is not done yet, and we might have some insight into where Rielly Smith will be playing, and we're going to start with that because there's a lot of question marks around that, where he'll fit in the lineup. I've seen a lot of comments and a lot of Rangers fans allude to the fact that he may be a third liner. I don't think that's the case, and neither does a couple reporters. So let's jump right into it. Of course, this came from NHL.com. The Rangers hope Smith can find a spot in the top line with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. And I thought this was a very interesting read. And of course, this was from David. And again, I thought it was a very interesting read. And in the article, he puts his projected lineup of Chris Kreider, Mika Zibanejad, Rielly Smith as the top line right wing. Then he has a second line. The rest of the lineup is about the same, or what we'd expect. He has Artemi Panarin, Vincent Trocheck, and Alexis Lafreniere. Now, I wouldn't touch that second line. They were very good last year. I wouldn't touch that second line. I think the first line needs some, toying with, as well as the rest of the lineup. We're not even sure Kaapo Kakko is going to start the year with the New York Rangers. You would think he would, right? Like, everything's lending to that he will start the year with the New York Rangers. And he will be a New York Ranger, and they don't want to give up on that player yet. But anyway, that fourth line of Jimmy Vesey, Sam Carrick, and Matt Rempe, not bad. That's going to be a difficult line for other teams to play against. And the defense pairings, obviously we knew that it was pretty much going to look like this. And he also projects that Jacob Trouba will be a third liner or third pairing, which I've also projected. I think he will be on the third pairing this coming season because, it seems like he may have taken a step back at this point, considering last year's playoffs, right? So we will have to see, and obviously we know the goaltender situation, which we'll get to Shesterkin later in the video. So I thought this was very interesting, the first line at least, because a lot of people projected that Rielly Smith could go, on the third line. I wasn't sure who was going to come up onto the first line. I wonder if Kaapo Kakko even gets a look on the first line, but Rielly Smith is a proven point getter in this league. He didn't have the greatest season in Pittsburgh, and honestly, we can get into his stats right now. And it's not the fact that he didn't have a really good season in Pittsburgh. I just think it was the fit on the team, and of course, the team wasn't that great. Couldn't really find a spot for him after trading for him from the Vegas Golden Knights, a Stanley Cup winning Vegas Golden Knights. And this is a Stanley Cup winner. This is the type of player you want on your team, a guy who's been there and done that. Obviously, only 40 points in 76 games last year, but his usage was pretty high. I mean, for him, at least, I guess, on the Pittsburgh Penguins at 16 minutes time on ice and as an average. And when you look towards his time as a New York Ranger here in this coming season, I mean, he's getting a little bit older, yes, but this is a guy who can, I think still put up some pretty good points and put together some good shifts for you. And if you put him on a line, like we were discussing, if you put him on a line with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider, it's going to be pretty hard for him not to score and put up points, right? Those are two really good players. Say what you want about them come playoff time, but those are two very good players, and he's going to put up points. And especially if he plays with them on the top line right wing spot, which is another, hole, quote unquote, that a lot of fans were saying that the Rangers didn't fill this offseason. But if Rielly Smith can come in and get, put together a pretty good season and a better season than the one he had in Pittsburgh, then I think that might work, right? He was a good player when he was in Vegas, right? Because they had a role for him. He had an identity, right? So I wonder if he finds that identity again with the New York Rangers on that top line. Very, very interesting stuff for sure. And, he goes on to say what they still need to find someone who can play the right wing position on the top line alongside Zibanejad and Kreider. Smith probably will be given the chance first now. I think that's a very interesting point because I don't know if Kaapo Kakko has necessarily earned the right to just be put in the top six immediately. I think he needs to start the season strong, and then maybe we might see Kaapo Kakko, realize his potential here and play in the top six. But I think Rielly Smith, because of experience and all these things, he's probably going to start on the first line. If it doesn't work out, the Rangers could look outside the organization after experimenting with numerous in-house candidates the past few seasons. That's another thing to keep in mind because Kaapo Kakko has not worked out, so maybe they look outside. But some key arrivals as well. Rielly Smith, obviously, traded from the Pittsburgh Penguins. for a couple draft picks. He had 40 points. We went through that last season and could be starting the season with Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. I think it would be very interesting. And it was Smith's only season with the Penguins after he spent the previous 6 seasons with the Vegas Golden Knights, helping them win a Stanley Cup. So obviously Stanley Cup pedigree, and I love the other addition in Sam Carrick as well. It's going to be a tough fourth line to play against, as you can see here. And last thing I want to touch on the Rielly Smith front is this quote from GM Chris Drury about Rielly Smith. He brings a lot of versatility to our lineup. He has a winning pedigree, having won in Vegas, a proven playoff performer, and I think he just fits in nicely with our entire group. At the end of the day, I wanted to try and give Peter Laviolette as many options as he can to try and put together the best lineup. So you know what, Chris Drury is doing his best here to give Laviolette a lot of different options that he can play with, right, heading into next season. And I think that is a good thing, right? Obviously, Rangers fans were hoping for a big fish, but I think at the end of the day, the Rangers have a very good team, and they also have to plan for the future, right? Lafreniere and Shesterkin. And speaking of Shesterkin, right, we can get into that now. This is from Anthony Russo of the Hockey Writers. The Rangers shouldn't rush Igor Shesterkin's extension, right? And I don't know if I agree with that necessarily, but we've had some numbers thrown out there, and we'll get into this. The average annual value will probably be the biggest obstacle in the next contract. If you look at some recent big goalie contracts, Sergei Bobrovsky scored a 7-year, $70 million deal in 2019. Carey Price, obviously, his contract was insane at the time, 8-year, $84 million contract. Which at the time was 14% of the cap. And I think Shesterkin is wanting exactly that, which, as you can see here, would equate to about $12.9 million a season. Will that happen? I'm not entirely sure or convinced that's going to happen on either side. I don't think, they might start at that number, but I don't think that's the number Shesterkin's going to end up getting. And the number would complicate things for the Rangers, who also have to save cap space, which is another thing we have to keep in mind. I mean, all the fans have to keep in mind, yes, they didn't go out and get a big fish in free agency this year, and people still want them to make a big trade. They have to save some of this cap room for next year to sign these guys, right? These guys are due for major raises, so it's going to be interesting. Slavkovsky just signed an 8-year, $60 million extension, and if you ask me, Lafreniere has been playing a little bit better than Slavkovsky, so and especially last season, Lafreniere had a great year. So this summer, you would have to think that the 2020 first rounder is in line for at least $8 million, which is true, right? You have to think that that is the case. So it's going to be very interesting. And then it seems like the Rangers might have a bit of advantage because obviously the Rangers can offer Shesterkin more term, which can bring the AAV down compared to another team. Like, at the end of the day, he's probably going to remain a New York Ranger. It's just a matter of how much per year is he getting paid, right? And I don't think it's going to be 12.9. I think I agree with Anthony where he says, it's probably going to be in the 10.5 range, maybe $11 million, something like that. It could be 9 to 10. Pause and read this if you want, but it's probably going to be somewhere in that neighborhood. I don't see it getting up to 12.9 or exactly 14% of the cap. And, if you do sign him to $10 million, he is your franchise goaltender, right? He's a big reason why the Rangers even went as far as they did last year in the playoffs, and he deserves that money, right? And as the salary cap continues to go up about $4 to $5 million a year, it's not going to hurt as much. You're going to be able to put together a competitive team for years to come. So I would sign him. I think 10.5 probably is fair. He might get a little bit more than that, right? Because he's going to start at 10.9-ish. That's where he's going to start because it's 14% of the cap, and that's where Price got. Bobrovsky got something similar. So obviously that's where he's going to start. And regardless, Shesterkin is going to get paid. It may not be tomorrow or before training camp, but he will. The question is if both sides can find a deal that makes themselves comfortable before next July. And I think that's very interesting too. I think this should get done before next offseason because it can get hairy. If you leave this to next offseason, you leave, another team might be willing to pay Shesterkin $13 million, let's say, right? Like they might be willing to. So I wouldn't let this get to next offseason. But do I think Shesterkin's going to leave the Rangers? No. He's going to end up getting paid. It's just a matter of when and how much. And I'm thinking it could be between 10 and $11 million. I don't think it's going to get quite up to that number of 12.9 or $13 million. But very interesting on the Shesterkin front. And again, from Russo, while losing Shesterkin would make things uncomfortable, it needs to be a negotiation. There's no accepting the first asking price in July. And while the star goaltender could elect to go to free agency, Drury will have the upper hand in some scenarios. And I think that's true. He obviously can offer him one extra year in term, unlike another team, which may bring the AAV down, which is a good thing for the New York Rangers. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to get done. It might take a little while. I wouldn't let it go to next July. but it's going to get done. It'll probably be like $10 or $11 million, something like that. So I think that's a pretty good deal for the Rangers starting and franchise goalie. But let me know in the comments what you think of Rielly Smith starting on the first line, what you think of the possible Igor Shesterkin extension that could be on the way. It could be on the way soon. We don't know, right? We haven't heard too much about negotiations, but it could be on the way soon. So let me know in the comments what you think. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything New York Rangers.